The lights feel hotter than they look from the cheap seats. A spool of haze floats across the stage, and the show's logo blinks in the background like a patient city. People clap when the next contestant finishes. Their applause sounds practiced. Behind the curtains, a girl in a threadbare coat folds her hands on her knees and hums, counting breaths. She is all elbows and quiet bones, hair knotted, coat thin. The coat smells faintly of old rain and a soup someone once left on a doorstep. A spotlight finds her. The judges sit at a long table with bottled water and paper smiles. Cameras pivot. The audience leans forward. The girl carries no instrument, no glittering thing. Her shoes are worn through at the heels. She grips the microphone like a lifeline and looks out at the faces that mean everything and nothing. "Can you tell us your name?" a judge asks. She shrugs. "I've been called a lot of things," she says, then stops. Instead, she asks, "If I sing well, will you give me a plate of food?" Laughter ripples, polite, uncertain. The host makes a joke, but the question stays, shining. She starts to sing. The song is not a show tune. It is a voice learned on benches and streetlights, following the rhythm of a city breathing hard. The melody rises like a tide and opens like a door. Her voice has cracks and places that smooth into silk. She sings about trains, about a mother's laugh, about a pocket of sunlight that felt like a promise. As she sings, the audience stops being polite spectators and becomes listeners. A woman 2 rows back buries her face. A suited man puts his phone down. The judges lean forward. In the second verse, a flash in the girl's eyes, hunger, yes, but not only. There is calculation, the way someone learns to expect nothing and to take nothing for granted. She remembers rooftops where she slept, the woman who left hot soup, a child who once made a paper boat for her. The song shifts to that memory. The room leans with it. When she finishes, the applause begins tentative and grows into honest clapping. The judges, used to polish and scripts, try to fit what they heard into a score sheet. "That was unusual," the head judge says. "Where did you learn to sing like that?" "I learned on the corner of 9th and Maple," she answers. "People used to give me coins." "Do you have training?" another asks. "No, just the city. They offer critique, technique, and presence, but there is also a wild card." The audience has made its choice. The show gives her a slot and a promise, mentoring and, privately, a plate of food and a jacket to keep her warm. Backstage, she eats slowly from a plastic container. Each bite is a map to memorize. A volunteer hands her a brochure for a community center. A production assistant offers a jacket. People make things right in small ways, and she accepts enough to survive the night without forgetting the edges that kept her sharp. The mentoring begins with voice coaches and lessons in stagecraft. They teach breath control, how to pick songs, how to shape a story for television. She agrees to some changes, more precision, less raw gravel, without losing the truth in her tone. She practices above a deli, counting measures on a cheap metronome. A teenager who used to watch her in the park taps the window to cheer. She is grateful but guarded. Gratitude is expensive when you know the cost. Invited back for a semi-final, she walks onto the stage to a chorus of expectation. The band plays behind her now, a small group of musicians who nod like shipmates. Midway through, she makes a choice. Instead of leaning into the expected vulnerability, she sings about the person with a low hat, about a child with a crooked grin, about small mercies and the instinct to keep walking. There is defiance now, a steadying heartbeat in her voice. Afterward, people come forward with thanks and stories. Producers talk about a summer tour in coffee houses and community halls. She signs paperwork with care. Contracts are chessboards she has learned to read. Prize money will mean a rented room and a week of steady showers. The summer tour is a string of small stages and fluorescent lights. Sometimes she plays for pay, sometimes for free. A clip of her performance circulates online because honesty resists being overly edited. Donations arrive. A fund is set up for housing and lessons. Strangers offer couches. She reads messages carefully. Promises over the internet can be the moon, beautiful but distant. There are joys, a check that covers rent for 2 months, a morning waking in a bed that is hers. There are new problems, agents asking her to fit playlists, brands wanting glossy ads. Friends from backrooms vanish when payment arrives. She is measured and praised, lifted and negotiated over. A woman who used to leave soup on the doorstep messages that a call to her son, sparked by the girl's song, brought him home. The artist reads the message and feels something in her chest unclench. The plate of food had been a small act in a crowded night. It fed a conversation that fed a reunion. She pays for lessons with a coach who is gentle and exacting, studies music theory, learns to name intervals and harmonics. Technique refines the edges but never removes the human breath in her phrasing. She learns to set boundaries when help comes with strings attached. She saves, signs through counsel, and chooses a modest place of her own. A popular talk show asks her to sing and tell her story. She refuses to be only a tearful paragraph. She speaks about dignity, about community, about the choices that kept her afloat. Viewers respond. A nonprofit organizes a fund to expand meals and music programs. The program is messy, accounting mistakes, debates about direction, but she argues with the stubbornness of someone who had no one to soften falls for her as a child. She learns compromise and holds small protective rules. Years move forward. She records an album, insisting it stay honest. Critics call it brave. She plays halls that respect the voice instead of arenas that swallow it. She uses benefits to support causes she believes in and keeps a house rule, meals for students, time at soup kitchens. The woman who left soup sits in the front row one night, and the singer dedicates a song to her. They both cry in the dark theater. A letter arrives from a baker who remembers tossing a coin to a street singer years ago. He writes that the girl's song taught him to bake for a shelter. He encloses a photo of a long table of bread and laughing people. You sang for a plate, he writes, and you fed a room. The girl's hands shake as she reads. The plate had been simple and warm, and its echo had become something larger. She returns once to the old corner for a small, quiet show. Friends bring a folding chair and a borrowed amp. The alley still smells of rain and frying oil. Familiar faces drift in. The kid who pumped his fist at the rehearsal window, the man with the leather jacket, the woman who left soup. She sings the songs that made her voice, the trains and the mothers and the small mercies, and the audience sends back applause that feels like the beginning of something. The life she builds is not a tidy rags to riches arc. It remains messy with debts and joys, and days when rent feels impossible. But in the margins she builds a net, a studio that funds lessons, a small charity that serves meals, a community space where young singers can practice without judgment. She keeps the old coat as a map of where she came from, draped across a chair or taken on cold mornings. Late at night she thinks of the first question she asked on stage, simple and fearless. The plate had been. She remembers the first coin pushed into her palm. She was 6, and the coin was cold, a foreign sun. A woman with a red scarf had unfolded a sandwich and set it on the curb without a word. The memory tastes like a promise she could not keep. Once she slept under a bridge and a stray dog curled. Against her knees, he left paw prints on the cardboard she used for a pillow. Patch disappeared, and her songs learned how to hold vanishings instead. On tour, she learned more than technique. She learned to take a phone call with grace and to refuse suggestions that would smooth her into someone else's product. At a dinner with potential sponsors, a well-meaning executive said, "Make it marketable." She felt the words like a hand trying to reshape clay. She chose instead to keep the ragged edges in her voice, the breath at the end of a line that sounded like truth. A studio session felt intimate and mechanical. Microphones gleamed, producers adjusted levels, someone suggested layering harmonies. She insisted on leaving one track raw, a single take with the whisper of her breath at the end. When the playback filled the control room, the engineer was quiet. The breath made the room soft. It made people cry on trains and in laundromats. The plate of food became the seed of a small charity. It began with a table in a church basement and a baker who had once tossed a coin. Volunteers lined up. A retired chef, a high school chorus, young people learning sound engineering. Sing for a Plate fed 30 people that first week and then grew. There were setbacks, grants denied, storm-canceled events, but the program learned to keep an emergency fund and to phone volunteers when weather turned. Running a charity, she realized, was like stitching. Love arrived quietly, the sound engineer who fixed her mic with a gentle curse, the line cook who brought extra bread to rehearsals, the librarian who kept the scholarship receipts in order. They showed up not as dramatic lovers but as people who made small promises and kept them. She loved with the hard, precise affection of someone who knows how to mend a torn seam. The internet gave and took. A viral clip brought donations and messages. At the same time, a hate comment thread spiraled and hurt like catching a cold. She learned to hold both, the noise of cruelty and the concrete hands of those who turned up at the kitchen to volunteer. One morning after a rough night, a woman hugged her and said, "Your song kept me alive when my sister wouldn't answer." The hug cleared the fog. Years on, she is neither a polished star nor a forgotten busker. She is a musician who speaks with both street and conservatory language. Young singers come to her, nervous and hopeful. She tells them what she once needed to hear: sing like someone is listening. Sing like you deserve everything. They laugh, but they learn. The show that launched her runs retrospective specials. The head judge from the first night comes back not as a critic but as a witness. "You asked for a plate," he says, watching footage, "and you gave a room a voice." On live television, he praises the way she turned a simple hunger into a project that feeds people and makes music. One winter morning, she walks past 9th and Maple and touches the municipal bench where she once curled up. A child sits there with a sandwich. It is a small, luminous circle, the woman with the red scarf, the coin, the rescued boy, a table of bread. She leaves an envelope for a teenager sleeping on a bench sometimes, a voucher for a warm meal, and a note, "You are seen." She does these things quietly, the ledger of kindness kept not in bank accounts but in small public acts. Her life is dense: songs, contracts, meetings, rehearsals, boardrooms, late-night writing, mornings with coffee she tastes like a small victory. She still wears the old coat on cold mornings to feel the map of where she came from. Sometimes she sings in huge halls, sometimes she sings on a corner in the rain. Both stages hold the same truth, she asked, so she sang. The plate of food led to a voice that fed more than hunger, courage, reconnection, and the slow work of building a village where none had been. There was one night when a contract could have changed everything, and not for the better. A manager offered quick exposure in exchange for rights to most of her music. The document smelled like varnish and greed. She sat with it, watching the letters rearrange her future into someone else's property. The charity needed stability. The scholarship fund needed backing. But the price was too high. She found a lawyer through a volunteer and negotiated terms that protected her songs and the program. It cost money, but it also taught her the value of owning a voice in more than a metaphor. She realized that dignity had a monetary price sometimes, and that insisting on fair terms was itself an act of self-care. A benefit in a renovated warehouse became the proof of concept: strings of lights, folding chairs, a modest band, and the woman with the red scarf in the front row. Midway through the set, the woman rose and walked with a man whose worn boots belonged to the same map of hardship the singer had known. When they reached the stage, the man hugged his mother, and the room exhaled as if a shared knot had been cut. Tears streaked faces. The singer felt the original plate of food echo in that moment, small kindness made enormous by its ripple. She hired a lean staff, an accountant who loved neat columns, a youth coordinator who had been served at the first table, a volunteer director who could organize chaos. They taught adolescents how to mic a song, how to read a contract, how to use a mixing board. The charity became a place where skill and dignity met. It was not grand, but it was steady. On the corner of 9th and Maple, a municipal bench now lives where she once slept. When she passes, a child sometimes sits there with a sandwich. She leaves vouchers for warm meals in the pockets of coats she knows are worn thin. Those small acts, anonymous and immediate, are the ledger she keeps. Fame never erased the lesson that began with a simple question on a stage: "If I sing well, will you give me a plate of food?" she asked. She sang, and the answer kept coming. Sometimes as a plate, sometimes as a program, sometimes as a hand held steady. She keeps singing not because she wants applause, but because she remembers that one small, fearless question. It became a life. It became a table. It became a net for people who might otherwise fall. Music, she learned, fed more than hunger. It fed the chance to be seen, and she kept passing that chance along. Small acts add up, again and again. Okay,